All right. Welcome back to Hitler's Foreign Policy Part 2. We have left off. Hitler has rearmed Germany and withdrawn from the League of Nations. Essentially, by this point, he's completely ripped up the Treaty of Versailles and has said, Germany's going to start to do its own thing. Hitler has correctly predicted that Great Britain and France are just not in a position to go to war with Germany. Politically, the people of France and Great Britain are opposed to any kind of military action. There's just not a stomach for fighting. And so Hitler takes advantage of that. What we see here to the left is a map of Germany kind of divided up as it is after the Treaty of Versailles. And so the area to the left that is covered in the maroonish looking color, that is the Rhineland. Hitler has already occupied that, as we discussed in the last lecture. Now, like I said, Hitler is looking to create a pan German state. So he wants to unite all the German speaking people. And the next area that he sets his eye on is going to be that pinkish purple area down on the bottom of the map here, which is Austria. Austria, there's quite a few Germanic people in Austria, and so Hitler is going to be looking to take over Austria next. Again, he's in a situation where his generals just are advising him not to take this step. They think it's too radical. It's one thing to remilitarize, or withdraw from the League of Nations, or to put troops in your own territory, like the Ruhr Valley. All of those things are things that we just expect sovereign nations have the ability to do. He's not attacking a foreign country or conquering a foreign country. And so, the German generals are saying, hey, the things you got away with are great. We didn't think you could get away with it. But this is going to be, if you set your sights on Austria, this is just going to be too much. There's just no way that, the West is going to let you get away with it. And Hitler essentially says, watch me. And so he comes up with the plan, and his plan is actually going to be a pretty decent plan to be able to keep the West placated. And so essentially what the plan is that he goes to the local Nazi party within Austria-Hungary. And so there are Nazis, like I said, there are Germans in Austria. There are sympathetic Germans in Austria. There are Austrians that are sympathetic to the German cause. And so the Nazi party has been established within Austria. And so they are a political party, and they're going out and they're protesting, and they're protesting the Austrian government, and they're protesting, the fact that they want to unify with Germany. And Hitler gives instructions to the local Nazi party. He essentially says, "Hey, you need to go out there and you need to get yourself arrested." And the Nazis do this. They go out and they're going to start to, in their marches and their parades, they're going to start to purposely misbehave because Hitler's running a PR game here, right? A public relations game. And so he intentionally has German, people with German heritage that are Nazis get arrested within Austria. And so, all of this, this political tension rises up until the Austrian Chancellor, Kurt von Schuschnigg, actually outlaws the Nazi party. And when he outlaws the Nazi party, this is going to give Hitler the the excuse that he needs to start making threats to the Austrian government. And so, what Hitler essentially does is he says, "Look, there are all of these." German Nazis that are being persecuted within Austria. And he goes to Schuschnigg and he essentially says, this is unacceptable. This is absolutely unacceptable to us. And what you need to do is you need to let my German troops come into Austria to make sure that you're not hurting any of these historically German people. And Schuschnigg understands that he's no longer a part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. He's does not have the military might to essentially say no to Hitler. And Hitler essentially says to the world, look, the world's pushing for democracy and self-determination. You hear this at the League of Nations all the time, and the idea of self-determination, each country should be able to vote. And Hitler says the historically German Austrians, these Nazi Austrians, are being denied their right to self-determination. And he says somebody needs to come in and step in and needs to ensure self-determination in Austria. And he volunteers his troops. And so, he knows that Schuschnigg can't stop him. And so all of a sudden, German troops flood in to Austria under the pretext of ensuring a free and fair election in Austria. And it's at this point that they actually do have an election. And so, because again, Hitler has to be concerned that if he doesn't, placate France and Great Britain, that they might say, oh, yeah, now you've invaded a foreign country and we have to come in to stop you. And so, the elections actually go off. Hitler does have some natural support in Austria, but when they hold off these elections, it's the German troops, the SS, led by Heinrich Himmler, who are the most fanatical Nazis, some of the most ruthless Nazis that there ever were, are going to come in and they're going to put German soldiers at all of the polling places. And then they're going to hold their vote. And they're voting on Anschluss or union. So Anschluss means union between Germany and Austria. And so when they're having this vote, there are literally men with guns standing there. This is not a secret ballot. The Nazis are clearly watching to see who's voting and who they're voting for. And so you can take a look at a ballot here. I don't speak German or Austrian, and I'm assuming that you don't either. But if you take a look at the ballot, we can see clearly Adolf Hitler's name, and then the circle, the da, and the whatever that is there. And what you see is that essentially that when handed this ballot right in the center, it's the yes vote for Anschluss, and the no vote is off to the side in a smaller circle. And so if a Nazi, military man, when a member of the Wehrmacht or the SS hands you this ballot and says vote, who do you think that they're going to vote for? And so you can see down at the bottom we have a translation there. Do you agree with the reunification of Austria and the German Empire? Do you vote for the party of Adolf Hitler? And so the election ends up with 99.73% of the vote voting for Anschluss. And so, clearly this is a rigged election, but it's going to allow Hitler to say to the larger world, he didn't really care about Austria. His soldiers are already in Austria. He controls Austria. And so, sure, he wants to placate, some of the civilians and the military men within Austria. But more importantly, he's trying to placate France and Great Britain. And so he says, look, the West is always talking about democracy. You're always talking about self-determination. We allowed the vote. People want this. Great Britain and France buy it. Now, they're starting to become very skeptical of Hitler. right? He tore up the Treaty of Versailles. He rebuilt his military, and very shortly thereafter, he actually invades a foreign country. Even though that this is, a relatively bloodless invasion, we're seeing Germany expanding again, and so the West. They're starting to look at Hitler, and they're starting to be concerned. But again, they don't have the stomach to fight. Hitler called their bluff, or at least smelled their weakness, if not called their bluff. And so Hitler's essentially just allowed to take Austria, and the West justifies it because they say, well, there are a lot of Germans that are living there. Austria and Germany have, historically gotten along, and they did have a vote. And so, how can we say no to democracy, even though the democracy is rigged, and anybody in power knows that it's rigged? They're just trying to avoid war. Right. So, Hitler marches through Austria, and again, Joseph Goebbels makes sure that everything is prearranged and that, everything looks great. There are people that enthusiastically embrace Hitler here, but behind the scenes, the SS moves in, and they're going to start to round up any communists, anybody that Hitler might view as a political rival. And interestingly enough, something else is happening at this same time within Germany domestically. We see Kristallnacht. And so the night of shattered glass. And so this is when Germany is really going to start its pogrom against the Jews. A pogrom just means like government sanctioned persecution of the Jews. Essentially the former SA members that were, Hitler's brown shirts are going to dress up like civilians, and they're going to go through and shatter Jewish storefronts, loot all the Jewish businesses, and attack the synagogues. When they attack the synagogues, they're going to go through and round up loot as much of the paperwork in the synagogues as possible, and then burn the synagogues down. They loot the paperwork very specifically because they want to know who the Jews are. Hitler's got a problem. He hates the Jews, but I challenge you to define what a Jew is. It's a difficult thing. It's to do because it is both a religion and an ethnicity. Are you Jewish because your mother's Jewish? Are you Jewish when just your father's Jewish and you're not? Are you Jewish just because you practice the religion? If both your parents are Jewish, but you converted to Catholicism, are you a Jew? And so Hitler, he's going to figure all that out at Nuremberg, but he wants to get as much information on who the Jews are and where they live as possible. So he uses Kristallnacht as a night to be able to do that. The German people will largely domestically ignore Kristallnacht because Hitler has, restored, or at least is in the process of restoring the German economy to what it once was, and because he's essentially been able to defy the West and now has rather bloodlessly conquered Austria. And so, normally good people, remember, were desperate just a few years back. And now all of a sudden, Germany is on the rise again and is a conquering power within Europe. And so these people kind of look the other way when Hitler goes after the Jews, and they essentially say, well, our lives are getting better and he's not coming after us. Maybe I can ignore that. And people tragically will ignore it until it becomes too late. That's why we just can't ever turn a blind eye to evil. So Hitler has taken Austria and is fully expanding. And so now, all of a sudden, he's going to be setting his eyes on Czechoslovakia. He's clearly not done yet. And so really, he approaches Czechoslovakia in actually two different parts. First, he's going to focus on the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland on the map there is that little bit in yellow or orange or whatever you want to call that color. I don't know why I picked maps that don't have like clearly defined just reds and blues and greens, but either way. So this orangish color here, that's the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland actually was a part of Germany. It was taken from them from the Treaty of Versailles, and very specifically because Czechoslovakia needs that land to be able to protect itself from an aggressive Germany. That area in the orange there is very mountainous, and so Czechoslovakia has taken that land and has put military bases on that land, so it can rather easily stop an invasion, and so it's very important to the security of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia does have a military. It is definitely more of a military power than Austria is. Schuschnigg in Austria, when Hitler said we're going to send troops to ensure these elections, Schuschnigg really couldn't stop them. Czechoslovakia, because of the Sudetenland, actually could put up a fight and potentially stop the German army. The German army is not yet this massive powerhouse. It's just beginning to remilitarize. So, it's not something that should be overlooked. But Czechoslovakia is believed to be able to, if it holds on to the Sudetenland, at least to put up a fight, if not be able to completely, defeat the Germans. So there's some risk here. So Hitler, after Austria, his generals are like, "Oh my God, how is this happening? How did you do this? Why were there no repercussions?" And he essentially tells his generals, "All right, now we need to prepare for the Sudetenland." And his generals, kind of for the reasons we just discussed, are like, "What are you talking about? Czechoslovakia, this is going to be much more difficult. The area of the Sudetenland is, definitely more defended than what Austria is. At some point, France and Great Britain are going to have to come to their senses." And so they advise Hitler against this. And then again, Hitler says, "Wait and watch." And so what's happening here is because the generals don't sense the fear in Great Britain and France, and because they're so hesitant, and Hitler has proven them wrong over and over and over and over again. What it's really going to do for those generals is it's going to create this kind of sense that, like, Hitler can't be wrong. And the reality is, so far he's been shockingly accurate, and it's absolutely crazy how successful he's been. Like, I mean, think about it. He just took over a country without really having to go to war, and nobody did anything about it. And so he's been very successful. And so the generals, at a certain point, they're going to start to think that maybe Hitler's, knows something we don't know, and maybe we should just follow him blindly, which is going to cause a problem for the German people later, and good for the rest of us around the world. So Hitler does the same thing in the Sudetenland that he did in Austria. There are Nazis in the Sudetenland. Like I said, that land has historically been German. And so, again, he goes to the local Nazi party. He tells the Nazi party, "Look, this is what this is what you're going to have to do. Go out, protest, get yourself arrested. Then I can use that as, an excuse to kind of step in on your behalf." And he does that. And so the Nazi Sudeten German party demands this area to be a free area. And so the Czech government is going to refuse. And when the Czech government refuses, we know what Hitler's going to do, right? I mean, he's going to essentially say, somebody's got to step in and protect these ethnically German people who are being persecuted across the world. And he's actually going to be able to point to Austria and say, "Look, there are people persecuting Germans everywhere." So Hitler will order the Nazis to stop negotiating with the Czech government, and then will actually demand the right of self-government from the Czech Republic. Right. It's at this point that the rest of the world is going to have to get involved. Great Britain and France are starting to get very nervous, and so Great Britain is going to send their Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in to negotiate with Hitler. There will be a series of negotiations that are going to happen here. One of the first ones is going to be at a place called Berchtesgaden in 1938. Hitler is with the Berchtesgaden meeting is actually going to kind of play like that he's not the aggressor here. He's going to talk to Chamberlain and kind of a peacemaker's tone, right? He's going to say, look, I understand that everybody's in a complicated situation here, but Germans are being persecuted and we can't have that. And really leads Chamberlain to believe that, Hitler's a guy that he can work with. Hitler's going to make a few demands here. He's going to say that German troops are going to need to be able to enter the Sudetenland by October 1st. He's going to insist that the military bases be left intact. I think that gives us some insight into what Hitler wants to do next. And then essentially he's going to demand that there be elections held to determine what happens to the Sudetenland next. It's at this point that Chamberlain's got to go home. He's got to discuss what's going to happen next. And keep in mind here that what we're seeing happen is negotiations about the future of Czechoslovakia are really being left to Great Britain and Germany. We're not really including Czechoslovakia in here. I mean, they'll have some token involvement, but really the negotiations between what happens to Czechoslovakia are going to be decided by Great Britain and Germany. And so there will be a second meeting, which is going to happen in Munich. This is where we see a term come into play that is going to be associated with the rise of Hitler forever, which is appeasement. Appeasement just means giving somebody something that they want, so they don't cause trouble. And so this is, if you look up appeasement in the dictionary today, there'll be a picture of Neville Chamberlain's face. We start to see that we have a second meeting here in Munich to determine the fate of Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland. And so Hitler at this meeting, he's not playing the nice guy here, and he essentially says, look, I can't hold back the German people. They're upset with the way that the Germans have been treated in the Sudetenland, and if you don't give me this land, I'm going to take it. And Chamberlain says, well, look, the Sudetenland is filled with Germans, right? It historically has been German. So we think we can justify giving you back the Sudetenland. But if you can't go any further than this. And Hitler will promise not to go any further. And so Chamberlain is, and we have a picture here of Neville Chamberlain shaking hands with Adolf Hitler. They think they've come to a deal. Neville Chamberlain will head back home, and when he heads back home, he will declare, this means peace in our time. He thinks that Hitler is fully satiated. He's not going to want any more land. Little does he know that Hitler's not deterred at all. He smells blood in the world. He knows that the West is weak, and he's going to attempt to exploit it as much as possible. Right. So it's at this point that the Sudetenland is essentially handed over to Hitler. Now, Hitler's not done. He wants the rest of Czechoslovakia, but there's really, at this point, the rest of Czechoslovakia doesn't contain, historically German people. And so because it doesn't contain historically German people, Hitler's not going to be able to play the same game that he has played before. And so in 1939, Hitler is just going to outright invade Czechoslovakia, right? So this will be the first significant territory that Hitler's able to take over that doesn't contain actual German people in it, right? So this is just outright aggression. And because because the Sudetenland has been taken away from the Czechs, they're not able to really mount any kind of serious defense. And again, without much bloodshed, the Nazis, because they're able to surpass the mountains in the Sudetenland, they're able to relatively easily conquer the rest of Czechoslovakia. This is going to be significant. Czechoslovakia does have, promises from the Western powers that if they are invaded, that those Western powers will come to their aid. And the West just chickens out, right? So it's not just Western powers. The Soviet Union is actually involved in this alliance with defensive alliance with Czechoslovakia too. And according to this defensive alliance, if Czechoslovakia is invaded by any foreign powers, these Western powers and the Soviet Union will come to Czechoslovakia's aid. There's an asterisk next to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union actually doesn't have to invade and help Czechoslovakia unless the other Western powers do first. And so what we see is the Western powers do not honor the terms of their defensive alliance, and they do it in a really sneaky way. I mean, they're just snakes here. Essentially, what they say is the Western powers say they made a treaty with Czechoslovakia, but once Czechoslovakia voluntarily gave up the Sudetenland, it's not the same country anymore, and therefore the defensive alliance is no longer a legally binding document. It's at this point that Joseph Stalin just is like, oh my God, like you can't trust the West. And he essentially washes his hands of the West and says, I'm done with you guys. I can't trust you. I've got to look out essentially for myself. So Mussolini sees all of the success of Adolf Hitler, and he's going to try his own hand at expansion as well. And so in 39, we see Mussolini and Italy invade Albania, right? And so at this point, Italy and Germany signs a full military alliance. They've officially made it official. Germany and Italy are now dating. All right, so the last piece of expansion that we're going to have before all-out war is going to happen in Poland here. Now, the West is shocked that Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia, and they kind of realize that the next area that makes sense for him to be able to, for Germany to take, is going to be Poland. There's some strategic reason for that, as well as Mein Kampf has been talking about Lebensraum to the east of Germany, and so Poland. It makes sense that Hitler is moving in that direction. But if you take a look at the map here, after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, you could the blue up there is Germany. And you'll notice Poland has essentially surrounded a small chunk of what is, in fact, Germany. And so, Germany controls that area called East Prussia. And, Hitler wants to be able to, he doesn't want to have East Prussia completely separated from the rest of Germany. And so, there's this area there, the Polish corridor that's between Germany proper and East Prussia. And so he clearly wants that back. Also, that little purple area next to East Prussia, that's the port of Danzig that used to be German and now is an international port. That is an incredibly valuable piece of property economically and militarily. And so Hitler's going to want that back. So he's got to come up with the plan to take Poland, but it's at this point that both Great Britain, actually France, draws a line in the sand. Great Britain and France say, enough is enough. If you cross this line, we're going to war. Hitler doesn't believe it because they've been, drawing lines and Hitler's been crossing them for the past several years. And so Hitler still thinks you guys are cowards. You're not going to do it, even though he's kind of itching for war. At this point, he does kind of want to try out his new military, but he still doesn't believe the threat from the West. And so, Hitler starts to make plans to be able to take Poland. And it's at this point, again, his generals are like questioning this, but it's hard to say no. The fact that Hitler has been so successful and the West has backed down and backed down and backed down, that the German generals just kind of go along with it. What Hitler does recognize, though, is that there is one major obstacle that he's got to be terrified of. If he goes after Poland, that threatens another nation. If you look to the right of this map, there's a country in red there where you just see a very small sliver of the country. That's the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is gigantic. It doesn't have a very technologically advanced military, but it does have a massive military, right? A military that can cause some real serious problems for Germany. So Hitler is afraid that if he invades Poland, what will happen is the Soviet Union will get so freaked out that they're next, that the Soviet Union might just invade. And German military is not ready yet to take on the Soviet military. And so he's got to contend with that. So the Germans are actually going to go to the Soviet Union, and they're going to create a secret alliance. It's not even technically an alliance; it's a non-aggression pact. It's the German-Soviet non-aggression pact. We call it the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. However you want to call it, but essentially, what Hitler says is he goes to the Soviet Union and he talks to the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, and he says, look, I want to invade Poland, and I bet you do too. Poland, significant portions of Poland used to be part of the Soviet Union before, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that took Russia out of World War I. And so the Soviet Union wants that land back. And so, the Germans and the Soviets hate each other. The fascists hate the communists, right? They are mortal enemies. But Joseph Stalin sees Poland as an opportunity to get some of that land back. Plus, he knows that he's got to buy time. He's not ready to fight Germany either. The Soviet purges, in a previous lecture, we talked about, what Joseph Stalin did when he got into power. He killed anybody of any talent. And so the top leadership in the military have just been destroyed. And so there's really nobody qualified to lead his military yet. And he's got to replenish his numbers, and he's got to get people prepared to fight. He took out all the business leaders, the factory owners, the managers, anybody of any talent, because those people of talent, threaten his power. And so the factories aren't running right. He's not able to produce all the things he needs for war. And so he needs time. And so when Hitler comes to him and says, look, we want to invade Poland, if I invade from the West and you invade from the East, we can split it up and then promise not to fight each other. Stalin, that's just too good of a deal for Stalin to pass up. And so, he gets part of his land back, and he gets a promise from Hitler that Hitler won't invade him. That'll give him the time to rebuild his military and rebuild his economy. Now, Stalin's not an idiot. He knows that eventually, the Soviet Union Union and Germany are going to have to butt heads because these two different ideologies just won't work together. But Stalin needs to buy time. And so, and honestly, so does Germany. And so they come to this agreement. This agreement, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or the Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, is just the death knell for Poland. Poland's in trouble. So Germany starts to make demands on Poland. They essentially are going to make the same claims that they've made before. They say that Germans are being persecuted within Poland. Now, this is not really believable. There's not enough German people in Poland for that to really be an issue. And so, the Germans are going to, say, look, if you don't stop persecuting Germans and return the port of Danzig back to Germany, if you don't allow us access to East Prussia through that Polish corridor that we had talked about earlier, and if you don't improve the treatment of Germans in Poland, then we're going to have to invade. And so Poland's like, oh boy, what are we going to do here? And so all of a sudden now, they're in trouble. Like I said before, the Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, Hitler and Stalin have already made this agreement. They're not going to invade each other. Poland doesn't really know about that. The rest of the world doesn't know about it. They will be shocked, as a matter of fact, to watch Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler actually work together. So sorry to fly through here, but we're running out of time. So the German people, or Hitler, I should say, decides to invade Poland. And so what he does is, again, he doesn't want to get blamed for it. He still thinks he can trick the West into, believing that it's not his fault. And so he actually has some German soldiers dress up as Polish soldiers and attack German military bases just on the German side of the border between Poland and Germany. And so German troops will kill other German troops. And Hitler will say, we've been attacked. Nobody around the world believes that. No way would Poland attack Germany. The Polish military is not in a position to fight, to be able to, fight the German army. As a matter of fact, the Polish are going to fight incredibly bravely here, but we're going to have Polish cavalry on horses and with sabers, charging German tanks. The Polish are not looking to start this fight. But either way, that's the excuse that Hitler uses because, he's trying to keep the French and British off his back. And Germany invades. By September 3rd, Britain and France are going to declare war on Germany, just like they promised that they would, but it won't be quick enough. And so even though they declare war, they're not going to be able to get any troops or aid to Poland before Poland falls. Germany has invaded, and when they invade, they're going to be able to take Poland relatively easily. Like I said, there is some Polish resistance. There's some great war stories about Polish soldiers on horses, charging down tanks very valiantly. That's just not going to work, though. There's also stories that the Polish had trained, local dogs to, they had taken models of tanks and rounded up city dogs and, trained those dogs every day to feed the dogs. They would tape a stake underneath these model tanks and let the dogs run out. They smell the steak, they run underneath the model tank and eat the tank. And when the German soldiers actually do invade, they strap bombs to the dogs and let them loose, and they run under the tank and right. A pretty ingenious way to fight some tanks. Absolutely terrible. Earlier, you could probably hear my dog in here chewing on a bone. Definitely a sad thing, but just Polish ingenuity. Hitler is actually so successful that he takes his half of Poland much faster than anticipated. And when he does that, Stalin actually gets really upset because he thinks that Germany's going to take all of Poland before he can get there. But the German soldiers will hold off. Hitler is smart here. He doesn't want to upset the Soviet Union. Remember, he knows he can't, like, fighting a two front war is not a good idea at this point. So he doesn't want to upset the Soviet Union. And the world is shocked when the Soviets and the Germans divide up Poland. This, my friends, is the official start of World War II from the perspective of Europe. Like I said in previous lectures, the real start of World War II, from the Asian perspective, is when Japan invades Manchuria. All right. Thank you very much. This concludes Hitler's Foreign Policy, Part 2.